Hey everyone, Kevin P. McAuliffe here for Assimilate Inc. And in this tutorial, we're going to cover some of the new features inside of the 9.1 release of Assimilate Scratch. Now, keep in mind, there's no way that we can cover everything in this lesson. So remember that you can always check out the release notes for version 9.1 in the link below to get all the details you need before you get started with this much welcomed update. Now, let's keep our introduction short and let's just get into Scratch and get started. Alright, so let's Command or Alt and tab into Assimilate Scratch. As you can see, we are on the landing page and project selection window. Now, as always, what I encourage you to do, especially if you're a freelancer working in Scratch, is when you sit down in front of it, always check the version that you are working on. We can simply do that by clicking anywhere in the middle of the splash screen. You'll see the system information is brought up and displayed for us. And as you can see in the upper right hand corner, we are working with Scratch version 9.1 build 1019. Always handy information for you to know before you get started working. Now, this isn't the first time that I've launched version 9.1, so I'm actually missing the first menu that will pop up when you launch it for the first time, but I'm going to call it up anyways. And you can do this after the fact if you want to by simply navigating down here to your setup, and you'll see I'm brought to the Enhance the Scratch Experience window. Now, the reason that I wanted to draw your attention to this right off the bat is because there's been previous lessons done about working with Matchbox plugins inside of Scratch. They are free. The only catch with them was always finding them, downloading them, and installing them. Well, you do not need to do that any longer. Now you can simply select the Install Free Matchbox Plugins options. Simply say Start, and those plugins will be downloaded, installed automatically for you to get working with. So you've got some great tools to work with right off the bat. Now, we do have a couple other options in here. The ability to set up an After Effects and or Nuke bridge, as well as taking a tour and checking out some Scratch tutorials basics. Now, I'm going to deselect both of these because I've already installed the After Effects bridge inside of Scratch. And all I'm going to do is simply close this window. Now, I already have a project set up for what's new in version 9.1. So with it selected, we're going to enter the project. And what I want to talk now about is how we can now import footage, or cards for that matter, in a way that's a lot more user efficient and time efficient than we ever have before. Now, here's a very common situation that if you do a lot of Dailies work, I'm sure you may have run into. Let's navigate down to the Import Clips command. Now, as you can see, I have, in this case, 3 cards, but this could be as many as 10, 20, 50, 100 different cards, of which contain, anywhere from, 1 clip to 100 clips that we need to bring in and potentially put into different timelines to keep things exceptionally organized inside of Scratch. Now, how I used to have to do this is a manual process, bringing in each card individually, taking all those clips, dropping them into slots, creating timelines. You can already imagine how much time this would actually take. Well, with the 9.1 update, this task has actually been automated for us. What I'm going to do when I import these cards is we're going to import them by folder. You'll see that we can load all media in the current folder and in the subfolders. So what we're going to make sure of is that we come down, we're going to select our footage folder, and I'm going to select to import the folders. Now, what I'm also going to do is when I bring in those folders, or in this case, these card folders, is I'm going to create a new timeline from each one of those folders. Now, we can obviously get in and set some framing option and some handles if we want, but I'm going to leave everything the way that it is. And what I'm going to do is come down and say Open. Now, because I've selected to create timelines out of those clips, there are a few options that we need to set before we can actually have those clips put into different timelines. So the first thing we need to figure out is that the group that we're going to be brought in, what is it going to be? Is it going to go into the current group? Is it going to be new from the folder name? Or new plus the next number? Now, for me, I'm perfectly fine sticking these new timelines into the current group folder. And as far as the actual timeline name goes, I'm going to create a new timeline per subfolder. You'll see that we can have it set as current, new from folder name, or new per the subfolder. Now, you'll see that as I actually switch these, the name will actually change based on the selection that we have chosen. Now, something else I want to draw your attention to in here as well is you have the ability to load and sync audio directly from this folder as well as applying a lookup table if necessary. All I'm going to do now is simply say OK, and you'll see that in a matter of seconds, we now have those cards imported as timelines, all set to go. Okay, so let's move on now, and I want to talk about a few of the new features inside of the color effects panel. Now, the first place we're going is to our vector tool, our 6 vector tool, but you'll notice that the tool has changed. Now, one thing that I love about version 9.1 is if you want to keep rolling with the original 6 vector tool, no problem. We can always call it back up by heading over to our user preferences to the color effects section all the way down at the bottom. You'll see there's the use 6 vectors option. I'm simply going to enable it, close the user preferences, toggle between the construct window back to the color effects window, and I get the old tool back again. Now we're accustomed to how this tool works. For example, if I want to get in, work with this yellow color here, I'm going to select yellow. We obviously have the standard range that we're going to be working with that we can either widen or narrow. We can get in, make a hue shift here. If we need to get in and adjust it, we can simply grab the yellow range and drag it to wherever we need it to go to. Now, I always wish there was a more efficient way to work with vectors, and there now is working with the new grid tool. Now, what's important to keep in mind is that any changes that I make with the 6 vector tool will transfer over to the new tool, so you've got to keep that in mind. What I'm going to do is just reset the tool. We're going to head back to our user preferences. I'm just going to disable the 6 vector tool. I'm just going to turn off user preferences, toggle back and forth, and we now have the new color remap grid. Now, what's important to keep in mind is that the tool varies slightly based on what you're going to be doing. For the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to be working with the hue saturation option, but you also have the option to get in and work with saturation and luminance, which gives you a few different options. Now, in our hue saturation grid, we can get in and work with a circular grid or a rectangular grid, as well as working with linear or log 2, and we have the ability to get in and smooth the saturation and snap to center if necessary. So how exactly does this tool work? Well, let me show you. What I am going to do is I'm going to come over and we're going to use the color picker. Now, what's very cool about this tool is that you'll notice that with the color picker, as soon as I bring it onto the image, you're going to notice a little orange dot that's kind of jumping all over the place that actually represents the color that we're going to be selecting. You'll see as I head over green here, we're more or less in the green section, and we're going to be going with yellow. So what I'm going to do is that as soon as I select the color that I want, the tool's immediately going to jump to the point on the grid that's closest to that color. You'll see that I've clicked, and now when I pull away, we can now take just that color that we've selected and adjust it accordingly. Now, keep in mind that we can also add canvases to this tool, and again, like I mentioned before, depending on how you're comfortable working, if you'd prefer to have that rectangular grid, you can always switch over to it, and I find this new update just gives me much more control over the image working with both grids and the color picker tool. Alright, now I want to reset my grid back to the way that we had it originally, and I want to take this concept one step further. I'm just going to leave my grid on rectangular. We're going to head right back up to my image with the color picker on. And what I'm going to do is instead of just clicking on the image and then coming down and adjusting what we want to adjust down here in the grid, I'm going to click on the color that I want to adjust, and I'm just going to start dragging it in whatever direction I want it to go. And if you take a look at the grid, you'll see that this tool is actually completely interactive directly in the viewer. So you don't need to select the image and just go down and work with it in the grid if you don't want to. You can work with it right on the image itself. All right, let's move on and let's now talk about the update to curves. I'm just going to reset everything here. All right, so let's now move on. Let's talk about the new update to our curves tool. Now, you're probably familiar with how curves work. In this case, we're dealing with the master curve. So we're talking about shadows, midtones, highlights. If we want to get in, let's just change our image up just a little bit here, just so we're looking at something slightly different. Maybe we'll park it about here. And if I wanted to get in and, for example, adjust the midtones, I can simply grab that midpoint of our curve line, drag it north or south to get an adjustment to the midtones of this shot. And at any point, I'm just going to undo that, we can get in and start adding other points, maybe between the midtones and the highlights, to get in and start making adjustments. Now, this is a very, I'm not going to say cumbersome way to work, but it's a very, let's just say a very 2015 way to work. And we're now, moving into the 2020s here, and we want a new way to do this. And one thing that I love about working in Scratch, it's that it's very intuitive, and the tools that they've started to add to it are very visual tools. No longer are we stuck down in these curves. We can start making adjustments up in our actual canvas. Let me show you what I mean by this. I'm just going to reset this curve back to the way that we had it before. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to want to come in and adjust this shot and add a point to our curve based on the actual image, not based on the curve itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to turn on the pick option. Now as I start to drag over the image, you're going to see my little crosshairs appear. But what's more important here is I want you to watch what's happening down at the bottom on my master curve. You're going to notice a little triangle that's jumping around all over the place. What this actually represents is our position on the curve. You'll notice that as I park over something that's almost white, that triangle jumps to the right-hand side, almost all the way over towards the top of the highlights. Okay? Obviously getting in with grays, that's in the midtones, and black is getting into the shadows. So let's pick a point. Let's pick this point here. Now you'll see it's, moderately between our midtones and our shadows. Now at this point I could probably come down, say add the point, and start working. However, I said that Scratch is very intuitive. I don't actually even need to do that anymore. All I need to do is with pick and add selected, I can pick anywhere in the image. Let's just pick somewhere. That's actually pretty good right there because it's between our midtones and our highlights. And as soon as I click and hold, you'll see a point has been added. You might think that I'm going to come back down to the curve, but I'm not. I'm simply going to start dragging from there on the actual image itself to adjust the curve however we need to have it adjusted. Now that is very, very cool. But let's take this concept one step further. I'm always trying to take things one step further to show you how you can really start to utilize this tool. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to reset that master curve again. And in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down to the hue for this shot. Now let's pick a specific color. Let's pick yellow, for example, at the back of this truck. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave pick turned on, but I'm going to turn off add because I don't want another point added for the yellow that we're about to select. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to the yellow and I'm simply going to click on it and hold, and I'm going to start adjusting this. And as I drag up and down with hue turned on, you're going to notice that I'm going to do a secondary correction to that specific color to make it whatever color I feel that it needs to be. I can even almost match the umbrellas up there at the top of the screen. Now obviously keep in mind, I'm just going to undo what I just did here because this is a correction to that specific color. Anywhere else that color appears, like in this woman's dress or other places like that, it's going to make that adjustment as well. But we could get in and really start to make some pretty substantial changes to the color of this image really without touching a curve at all. Everything can be done right on the screen just like this. If I wanted to now get in and adjust the color of the umbrella, I can simply click on that, drag it. Let's change it to almost a purple color, and you'll see very quickly we can take an image that once looked like this, make it look like this, and you'll notice that those colors of red have not changed at all. They're still exactly the way that they were before. We've just made some minor changes to two of the other colors in the hue curve. So again, a very, very intuitive way to work. I'm just going to make sure that I reset everything before we go on. Like I said, an intuitive way to work. I love working in the canvas, and it's a very welcome feature inside of the 9.1 update. All right, let's move on. Now let's talk about another new great feature inside of 9.1, and that is inside of our LUT option. Now LUT's obviously fairly self-explanatory. We can import different types of creative LUTs to work with, but there's a lot of times where what you want to do is you might have 20, 30, 50 different creative LUTs that you want to go through very quickly, and you don't necessarily want to just import one, look at it, import the next one, look at it. What you now have the ability to do is to not only load a LUT, but once you have that LUT loaded from a specific folder, you can have Scratch take a look at all of the LUTs inside of that folder and then simply cycle through them so that you can get to each one of them at the snap of a finger. Alright, so animation has also been updated, and I want to show you a couple of the new updates to animation inside of Scratch. Now, to show this to you, we are going to need animation on some parameters. So let's just do a very basic animation. I'm just going to come back to my balance. I'm going to come down, I'm going to turn on auto keyframing, and let's just make some crazy adjustments to the image here, just so that we can actually have it come from this crazy pink color, and we're just going to have it come right back to 0. Now, as always, we know that when keyframes have been added, you'll see that the little tick bars have been added to the clip. And what I'm now going to do is switch over to the animation viewer here. There we go, perfect. Now, I kind of spoiled the surprise just a little bit here. Now I've added animation in here, and we can see where animation has been added in our situation because I've added animation to 3 parameters. Now you can see the animation happening here. There we go, on the red, green, and blue. However, there might be situations where in any given parameter or any given module, you've come in and added animation to a ton of parameters. Let's say we could have added animation to every other parameter or every third parameter in here. And to be honest, I don't want to be scrolling through trying to figure out what I've added animation to and what I haven't. Now, I kind of spoiled this a little bit when we came into our animation window or the animation tool, is that what we now have the ability to do is to come in and to show only the active layers or the active animation channels, basically meaning any channels that have animation on them will only be displayed. You'll notice you also have the option to show only animation channels of the selected layer or the primary layer as well. Now this is a big one right here, obviously, to be able to get in and quickly just filter out all the layers that don't have any animation on them to only see the layers that do. Now I've added animation to red, green, and blue, and what I do want to do here is actually just remove the animation for green and blue. So let's just select green. I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to delete this keyframe, and we're going to select blue as well, and I'm going to delete that keyframe. We're only going to deal with sort of this red transformation here. There we go, perfect. And what I am going to do in this transformation is I'm just going to add a bunch of other keyframes. So let's add some. I'm just going to say add. I'm going to put here, I'll put here, I'll put here, and I'll put here. What I'm also going to do is just come in and break these keyframes like such, and you'll see why I'm doing this in just a second. Okay. Let's now take this. We're just going to drop this way down. We're going to drop this one way up. Actually, I probably should do this the other way since we kind of broke those handles the other way. Perfect. Okay. There we go, very nice. And you can see that what we've now done is we now have red, getting super red, coming down to nothing, actually negative red values, pulling the red right out just to get blue. Let me just drag that down a little bit further here. And we're just gonna, perfect. Okay, bring that up, very nice. Okay, now what I might even wanna do, just so you get the idea of this, perfect. Now you'll see this is a very rigid animation that we've created. And maybe what I wanna do is I just wanna smooth this animation out just a little bit. Now we could get in, and depending on how we're doing this, we could adjust the handles if we want. What we now also have the ability to do is to come in and add filters to our animation. Now a couple that I want to show you in here, one is the smooth filter and one is the noise filter. And they create two very different looks, but two looks that definitely you're going to want to take notice of. So let's select smooth first. Now you'll notice that we can change the smooth factor down here below the actual filter. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab that factor. I'm just going to start adding. Now you'll notice that as soon as I click on factor and I start adjusting it, what has now happened is that a point has been added for every frame in this animation. Now I've kept mine fairly simple, but I want you to imagine that this kind of went all over the place based on, let's just say there was strobe lights or something happening in our image that we really needed to get in and animate very abruptly, I'll say. What we now have the ability to do is to start adjusting that smooth factor, and you can see what's immediately started to happen is that no longer is this a very rigid animation. I've now actually smoothed this animation out So in our case, I'll just say it's much more pleasing to the eye, but it's just overall just a more smooth transition between very red and not red at all. Now we have the ability to smooth, but we also have the ability to get in to create another very unique look. I'm just going to undo what I had just done just to set my timeline back the way that I had originally had it. I'm now going to navigate up to filter. I'm going to drop that down and I'm going to select noise. Now noise is a very cool one. Again, once I start adjusting the factor, you'll see that points have been added in our animation, basically keyframes for every frame of the animation. And all I'm going to do is start cranking this up. And I want you to take a look at what's going to happen when I zoom in. You'll notice that the animation curve is still there. However, what's now actually happened is that each one of those keyframes has now started to be adjusted, basically either up or down a little bit, to give us a very flickery look. Now, the more that we adjust the factor, the more of a difference there's going to be in between each keyframe. Now that's in between each frame, so keep that in mind. But what this gives us now is a very, very interesting look. You'll see now, again, the same basic animation curve. However, what this looks like is that there's actually a problem or very well static happening, or let's say one of the chips is dying in the camera, to give us almost a staticky, dream sequence nightmare look to our footage that you can now easily completely randomize and have be different every time by simply getting in and adjusting the factor however you need to have it adjusted. Now, what I encourage you to do is to get in, check out the other filters that we now have at our disposal, because as you can see, what would normally take potentially hours to create, having individual keyframes per frame of your shot, you can now create literally in a matter of seconds. Alright, so what I'm now going to do is just reset our red value back to 0, because we started out this lesson talking about effects, and I want to talk just briefly about some new effects that we have available to us inside of Scratch version 9.1. What I'm going to do is head on into our plugins. I'm going to head out of Matchbox. There's those Matchbox filters. Back up to the Assimilate filters, actually into effects, and you'll see here are 4 new effects that come standard inside of Scratch for you to work with. We have our denoiser, we have a diffusion effect, a grain emulator, and a highlight bloom effect. Again, these come standard inside of Scratch when you first install it. I'm now going to cancel out of this. Let's head to the render module. Couple things I want to point out in here. First, if you're familiar with Scratch, you know that we have some output templates based on different workflows. Well, in version 9.1, we have 4 new output templates for you to work on based on different Dailies workflows, from Copra H264 Dailies to DAX to Media Silo and Pix H264 Dailies as well. And the last thing that I want to point out is the new same as source export option. What this basically does is it just renders the clips in your timeline back out in their native resolution, frame rate, and aspect ratio. Now, what's good to keep in mind is that this is both a Dailies thing and an archiving thing, so depending on what you're doing, this is a fantastic new and welcome feature to have. Alright, now as I mentioned at the beginning of this lesson, there's absolutely no way that I can cover all of the new features inside of Scratch 9.1. So what I want you to do is to head on over and check out the release notes at the link below. And don't forget, for everything Scratch and Assimilate related, you can check us out on the web at www.assimilateinc.com. This has been Kevin P. McAuliffe. Thanks a lot for watching.